All right, everyone. Well, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, depending on where you're joining us. Thank you so much for joining us for the Ask Me Anything session focused on the InterWork Alliance. The InterWork Alliance is an initiative of the Global Blockchain Business Council and is dedicated to simplifying the digital interchange of value through the creation of open standards, protocols, and specifications for tokenized business services. Today, we're joined by a panel of leaders from Enterprise and the InterWork Alliance to discuss IWA's work, particularly the development of their frameworks, including the Token Taxonomy framework, InterWork and Analytics framework, as well as their insights on the future of a token-powered economy. During today's conversation, we'll also explain how you can get involved in IWA and contribute to the mission. So our speakers today are John Devadas, founder and president of NGD Enterprises, Marley Ray, principal program manager and principal architect for Azure Multi-Party Engineering at Microsoft. He is also the chair of IWA's Leadership Council, Paul Rapino, Chief Growth Officer at the Global Blockchain Business Council, and our moderator, Robin Leibowitz, Chief Marketing Officer at Digital Asset. For those of you joining us live today, we welcome you to ask questions at any point during the webinar. You can enter them in the Q&A box at the bottom of your Zoom screen. Our moderator, Robin, will address your questions throughout or leave some time at the end. So thanks everyone so much for joining us, and I'll hand things over to Robin to get us started.
Thanks, Sophia. I'm very pleased to moderate today's InterWork Alliance Ask Me Anything session. I am Robin Leibowitz, the CMO of Digital Asset. Digital Asset designs and delivers technology that reshapes legacy systems and workflows into efficient, secure, and interconnected applications. Digital Asset has been involved with the InterWork Alliance and GBBC since 2020. We were founding members of IWA, very excited to say, with Eric Saranecki, one of our co-founders, now sitting on their leadership council. Our CEO and co-founder, Yuval Rus, also joined the GBBC board of directors just in June of this year. The enterprise blockchain space moves very quickly, as you all know, and the noise in the market can be very overwhelming to customers. This is why we really value the standardization and guidance we are able to partner with both the IWA and GBBC on providing. To give you just a couple of examples of what we've been doing with the IWA, we've been involved in the InterWork Framework and Sustainability Working Groups, contributing to the Voluntary Ecological Markets White Paper that was released earlier this year. Another thing that we've been doing is the Global Standards Mapping Initiative as part of the GBBC. So really quite engaged on a number of levels. So I'd like to start today's session by asking our esteemed panelists to please introduce themselves as well so that you can get to know who's engaged in today's session. Let's start with you, Paul.
Hey, Robin, thank you for moderating, and welcome to IWA. It's great to have your experience at DA. Looking forward to it. I just want to start with my introduction real quick. Years at Microsoft in financial technology and digital marketing. After I left, I was coaxed to do a blockchain startup, actually two of them, right during the middle of crypto winter. And we got an MVP and we built the thing and it was awesome. And we did a roadshow and we got a lot of people interested. And then we died. But it rebuilt it. We opened the doors again in 2019. And during that time, the big aha was this is not just a joke. This is a real thing. Crypto is not just the only use case. And we saw a lot of interest in blockchain. About that time, I heard Marley, who you'll meet in a second, do a webinar on the InterWork Alliance. And we'll talk more about that. But he piqued my interest. And right after that, I sent him an email. And a few months later, maybe a few weeks later, I moved over to IWA. And it's been an amazing ride. We've seen a lot of great success, and we'll talk about that. But we merged about a month ago with GBBC to scale up. And it's been a great, warm welcome. So I want to thank the GBBC team for welcoming us, making us feel a real part of the team, and it's exciting to be part of it. So looking forward to our talk today.
Thank you, Paul. I'll turn over to John next, please, for a little bit of an introduction. Oops, John, can't hear you. There you go.
There we go. Good. Thank you, Robin. Good morning. Good afternoon. It's a privilege to be here on this panel. I want to thank you for the opportunity. Just briefly, John Davidas, based in Seattle, NGD Enterprise, we build blockchain developer tools, debuggers, testing frameworks, tools for analysis, performance, things like that. I had the, as Paul was saying, I had the unique privilege of being a co-founder of the IWA last year. And it's quite funny, actually, all three of us, Marley, Paul, myself, we are ex-Microsoft. And in a previous lifetime, spent about 2 decades at Microsoft building out the .NET architecture, team and business tools and frameworks for VS.NET, as well as Microsoft Digital. And so once again, thank you for this opportunity. Look forward to a very interesting discussion of who we are and where we go to next as part of the GBBC.
Great, thank you for that. So Marley, you're up the best for last, as we've said.
Thank you, Robin. I'll correct my buddy John that I'm still at Microsoft, not quite X. There's some email I didn't get, which anyway. So yeah, Marley Ray. I've been at Microsoft about 21 years. I started what we call the blockchain engineering team back in 2015 at Microsoft, and evolved it into sort of looking at what are the other ingredients that that enterprises and really multi-party systems require other than just a blockchain. You need more than just a shared ledger. You have to have lots of different components, and one of them being some way to have agreement on what we're going to call things and standards. And that's what led us to pursue the creation of the InterWork Alliance to try to get folks together to solve these multi-party problems and start with having multiple parties in the discussion from the onset. So many of these attempts have been made from a single perspective, coming in to try to create a multi-party system, and they've largely failed because of their origin being just from one perspective. And IWA provides that sort of environment for us to launch these types of promising initiatives. So anyway, as a co-founder of the InterWork Alliance and creator of one of the underlying frameworks that's used, the Token Taxonomy framework, which we'll talk a good bit about, I'm excited to be here and broaden the use of this platform.
Great, thank you. So I think you've sort of started to dive into our first question about what is the InterWork Alliance and the primary motivations for launching it. Anything else you really want to expand on there before we go further into our topics?
Yeah, I mean, the one main thing we, is running the blockchain engineering team and having lots of excited customers come to Microsoft and say, hey, we want to build this blockchain app, or some of them were not appropriate, and we found that success wasn't really hinged on the number or the participant and the strength of their business case, but it was how inclusive was that initial conversation, and how can you come to some sort of agreement on what at the time we called minimally viable shared blockchain data, which is a mouthful, which is essentially how do you agree in these larger consortiums, what is that shared view of this process, whatever that process might be. And if you don't agree on it, where do you go hash these things out without getting in the technical weeds, right? So many of these initiatives started from IT, people learning about blockchain and coming in and everything was was crypto, or it was decentralized this, and they lost what are you actually trying to do with each other, and how do you net that stuff out? So we formed the InterWork Alliance to be what we call implementation neutral. So we basically said, leave your implementation baggage at the door Don't come in trying to tell me why your blockchain's, hash rate was better, or your consensus algorithm was faster. That's all great. Very, very good. And those concepts are important to understand what is a shared ledger. But ultimately, we needed a place to have business people or business adjacent people that understand what they were trying to do, come together with their constituents from other organizations. They could be competitors or someone in their supply chain, and agree, what are we going to tokenize? What does it mean? What is that token? How does it behave? What data does it need to represent? What are my requirements? What are your requirements? What are the overlaps? So we started out with doing this thing, and one of the tenets was we don't want to reinvent the wheel for each business scenario. We think there's reusability and commonality from financial services lines of business to supply chain and healthcare, and across verticals we'll have these reusable components. So we created these frameworks underneath so that when one group solves a problem around how a token behaves or is restricted in one sense, they can then collaborate and contribute that to a library. So when another group is looking at a completely different business scenario, says, hey, we really need this restriction that we can't, and we only want this token to be able to be transferred once, for example. Well, somebody may have already solved that and defined those requirements, and you can go look in that framework and say, oh, we're just going to reuse this bit. And then you start to see we have interoperability across these scenarios. So anyway, that's the inspiration and the idea behind InterWork Alliance. And I guess what we're going to do today is basically tell you how we've been doing that and how it's evolved. But that's the basic motivation behind it.
Yes, very inspiring and very beneficial, the collaboration and the sharing to make this all work better across the different segments and use cases. So I think this is going to be great for us to dive into how that's working. Paul, before we go any further, I think I'd ask you if you can tell us a little bit about IWA's structure as an organization and the recent merger with the GBBC. How will IWA's work really benefit from merging with the GBBC? I know that's really front and center for a lot of people here on the call.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for that question. So if you take what Marley said, we had a founding board of about, I think it was 5 founding members, and they put a staff together and a budget, and we built a little business, which was a nonprofit organization, and we built it to 60 members. And through that, we were able to see that there is, 1, a lot of interest, and 2, we can actually drive value. And we'll talk about what that looks like in a bit. What we didn't have was scale with 60 people, or with 60 members rather. It was going to be really hard in an industry that's moving so quickly to scale enough use cases. So, a couple of things. 1, we wanted to really clarify, what is a token? What is a digital asset? And what can I do with it? And that was, a brand new term just 2 years ago. From there, we said, how do we build a structure so that we can actually get people's feedback, drive that feedback into something productive, and then move it in toward a operating standard. So we want to remain, as Marley said, interoperable, which means we were neutral. We didn't get into what tech it is. And the big aha for me was, this is a complex technology in many ways, but also in many ways with the dozens of Zoom calls and some in-person meetings over the last year or so. The big aha was, when you talk use case, when you talk business problem, you get people nodding and leaning into the conversation. And all of you are in business, and when people do that, it's a good sign, and you get a lot of productive conversation. So when we focus on use case, we want to be a business first membership, And so we want the business to, member to come in with a business problem or a potential solution, one person or many in that organization, join the group and dig into a use case. What we provide is an operating framework as well as a playbook. How do you take something from an idea and move it into implementation? Marty said we basically you leave implementation at the door and then you pick it up on the other end. But our job is to make sure that it's plug and play in many respects, and which is why we have a great technical team in place. Through that, though, we were able to see that one, we could operationalize it, and two, we could start to scale it. What we didn't have was size. So I met Sandra through, I don't know, somebody on the board or a meeting somehow about in May after I met with our board, and I said, we need to scale this thing, and we kind of kicked around some ideas, and we said, well, why don't we talk to some other partners? And Sandra and I met shortly after, and it was just a perfect mix. If you look at the high level of what the GBBC has brought, and many of you who are members are passionate about it and have seen the results, you're at the highest level. You're looking at a regulatory kind of interaction, thought leadership, the ability to drive partnerships with the relationships that we nurture or help nurture, and then work through a lot of the tactical execution. What we didn't have, or what they didn't have, was what we had was the framework to keep that conversation moving in a positive direction. So Sandra and I got together, we worked with the boards, and it was it was fun and difficult, but we got it done and merged two organizations pretty quickly. And we're moving forward in a pretty solid operating model, which we'll talk about in just a second. But that idea of framework, talk specifics, and really understand the use case is the main thing we want to have our members bring to the table.
All right, thank you for that. So I know the IWA's mission is to simplify the digital interchange of value by empowering organizations to adopt and use token-powered services. I think I'm going to turn over to John and Marley, if I could, and ask the two of you to please bring this to life for us, really by providing some use case examples of how token-powered services will change the way we interact and why this is significant. Either of you, if you could just take a stab at that.
I can go first if you want, and Marley, you can correct me, of course. So let me start with why do we care? Why do you care? Yeah, and we've seen, in previous waves of technology eras and evolution, early in the game, vendors can and will talk about how they have a superior technology or a better algorithm and so on and so forth. But eventually, as the technology wave matures, our customers, your customers, will demand interoperability. They will demand that the various pieces of the puzzle work together in some meaningful way to create value for the end user, for the customer. And that's why we care about what is happening with the IWA. We care about open standards. Now, what does it mean? It means, for me at least, two things: schemas and protocols, and being able to have this opportunity for multiple vendors, providers to be able to collaborate in the interest of, again, like I said, creating outcomes for our customers. So this, in practical terms for me, means three things. I think of this colloquially as the what, the how, and the why, the key frameworks we have in the IWA. So first of all, the what, in a blockchain platform, in a blockchain stack, the things, the entities that we talk about are called tokens or perhaps assets. Now, having the ability to codify, to describe, to have a taxonomy and ontology for these tokens is the underpinning, is the platform. And that's what Marley early on designed with the Token Taxonomy framework, the TTF. So having a language, a meta model to describe and thereby to be able to share, collaborate, and interop. That's the first piece of the puzzle. That's the what. The second piece is then, so how do these tokens actually, how are they processed? What do we do with them? And again, this is what we often call smart contracts. Having a framework, having standards for us to be able to describe the operations, the processing on these tokens is the second piece, which is the applications framework. And the last piece for me is the why. So when we have a system, any system, we want to understand. So why do certain things happen? What happened? The insights, the analytics, and this is the third piece, which is the IWA's analytics framework. So across the three, the what, the how, and the why, the token taxonomy framework, the application framework, and the analytics framework, I believe the IWA, and now, of course, together with the GBBC, we have laid out the canvas where now vendors, providers can innovate and further create value for our customers. So let me give it to you, Marley, to add on to that.
I think that's right. I mean, it sort of breaks the ideas, and many of you probably sat in rooms with business leaders that heard about blockchain and they had an idea of some dramatically revolutionizing their industry or spinning up a net new business, and they didn't know how to get started. And that we saw lots of folks sort of confusing the what and the how together. I mean, tokens would have contract logic in them, when you really wanted to separate those things out and have reusability. So we felt like it was important at a business level to sort of make sure we come up with common language, how we describe things. And if you look in the IWA, when we talk about tokens, we describe tokens having behaviors, which can be a capability or a restriction, like transferable and non-transferable, and having basic rules of how behaviors can interact with each other or conflict with each other, and the rules of preventing that from happening. And then properties. So, which is, what is that set of data that token needs to carry around? So if I'm the owner of a token or I'm inspecting a token, what data do I need to expect to see or be able to get access to, or not? And things like privacy and laying that down helps people break down these bigger problems into smaller digestible chunks. It's the old, how do you eat an elephant? You don't try to eat it all at once. And the framework approach and the way we structure the InterWork Alliance business use cases, it seems to net positive results for multiple organizations to really sort of move the ball forward. So I think that's the main benefit of the tokenized economy, is that it really applies to every industry, and every interaction between parties will see value in tokenizing their business. Now, what that token is and what it can do, we think we have the tools to allow you to express those in business requirements in the tools that IWA presents, and will be a great aid in accelerating that.
Hey, Robin, can I just
yes, please.
Can I just build on that to go into some use cases? Sophia, if you want to show the use cases. So with those frameworks in place, customer members started coming to us on many fronts and wanted to ask about certain use cases. So if you can go to the use case slide, Sophia. The ability for us to talk to a member and apply them to a specific working group was really what we wanted to do. So on the top, you could see the taxonomies that John and Marley talked about. We'll go into that a little more detail in a bit. But on the use case on the business side, we had several common points of interest. One was sustainability, one was supply chain, DLT security, and debt issuance. So these are the groups we have today, and they work interchangeably with the taxonomy framework. They define the business problem, and then we see what is a potential solution, and then working together with the members. And meetings could go between 10 and sometimes 30 people, and we get a lot of information in terms of what are the what we call the artifacts, or what are the components that would go into a potential token. And then these working groups can work through that problem, and we take it out at the other end toward implementation. The sustainability was really the first out of the box, and Marley and the team drove that pretty significantly, which you'll be seeing a lot more of that in the press in the next couple of weeks, as well as in the GSMI and some of the other work that GBBC is doing. But again, if you're listening and want to jump in, these groups are already in place. We can plug you in. We'll talk about that a little later. If you have a business idea and you said, hey, we have a group of people that are trying to solve a problem, and can we do it with you? Let's do that, because we members drive the groups, and as long as there's people and plans in place, we can probably scale that up. So today, these are the working groups we work on. We can talk more about the details if you have questions.
Great. Thanks, Paul, for that further detail on that. Before we go on, I actually thought, since we've been talking about taxonomy quite a bit here, that I would take one of the questions and raise that for the panel to address, which kind of touches on that. So the question is, when an asset is tokenized, does that asset carry the same or similar characteristics when it was a traditional asset? Is the security remain a security even after it's tokenized, and the same for a commodity? I'll throw that open to the panel. Does somebody want to take that one?
Well, I guess.
I'm happy to. Go ahead, John.
Go ahead, Marley, please.
I was going to say, the answer is yes and no. It really depends on what the tools you're able to define. So when we say an asset, we're talking about a tangible asset, which sometimes is called a reference token when you look at the token taxonomy, the language we use, versus an intrinsic token, which is the token itself is the value, like a Bitcoin. So when you're tokenizing a physical asset, it can carry some of those characteristics. You usually want to have sort of a minimizing the amount of data that is required for all the constituents that might want to either take custody of that asset as it moves through a supply chain. But you can put restrictions on it if your compliance concerns about as an asset gets digitized, you'll be able to express those and using the framework. And if there's a rule that is not clearly articulated, the great thing about the frameworks is you can define new behaviors or new properties. So there's no solid answer there, but from other than to say all the possibilities are there, and the tools will let you do that. It's really up to the group to decide and understand what any restrictions that might be placed on an asset as it's digitized. I don't know, John, if you want to speak further on that one.
Yeah, no, Marley, I think you addressed it. Just want to make a quick comment about, I'm looking at the question and it asks about securities and commodities. I want to just point out that the work in terms of the frameworks, the standards, the schemas and protocols is coupled obviously separately with the framework in terms of securities, policy, regulations and such. So I would just be careful to say they are two complementary perspectives. And the frameworks themselves do not necessarily convey any particular implications with respect to securities or commodities themselves.
And if I can build on that, when you look at a business problem, the first thing you want to do is, what problem are you trying to solve? On the operation side, or on the revenue side, or on the expense reduction side, whatever that kind of solution is. And then you have to ask, well, can it be done more efficiently than it is today? And then you can move into what kind of technology can help us actually do that. So then, assuming you move toward blockchain, there are a lot of different as Marley and John pointed out, there are a lot of different requirements that are necessary to actually tokenize something. And when you get into the financials, that's why we have a legal body associated, or at least connection of members, because we need that feedback. So if you're in, legal, please look to join our group, because we can use some input and feedback. But the members also bring a point of view to the table. And some of this won't be solved. But when we talk, and Saunders opened up a lot of doors for us to talk to regulators and to political leaders. And the biggest question they ask is, number one, educate my team and educate me so I know how to talk about it. And two is, can you give me some tangible proof that this is working and how we should think about it? So that's where these frameworks come in, because it simplifies that, so we can get a credible point of view to the marketplace to help push through some of these outstanding questions.
Great. We have some really great questions coming in, but before we turn to more of those, I think it would be helpful to start to dive into the Token Taxonomy framework, the TTF. I've heard several mentions of it, but now I think if maybe John, if you could really talk to what is the TTF more fully, and how does it fit into the broader picture of establishing interoperability between protocols and systems. I think we might have had a slide I saw before. Maybe we could put that up so that you could speak to that.
Yes, certainly. Thank you, Robin. I'll give you a quick summary, and then, yes, there are some really good questions, so we should probably move on to the questions.
Yeah, definitely.
Think of the TTF, and again, I think of Marley as kind of the father of the TTF. The TTF is, depending on your perspective, a meta model. It's also an ontology, a way for us to describe tokens, these entities. And you can also think of them as assets, digital assets. So in terms of the attributes, the behaviors, the characteristics, and at the highest level, I'm sure we all know fungible, non-fungible, but that's only at a very high level. As you go in, think of aspects like, is this divisible or not, right? Aspects of those nature, being able to precisely delineate, which then enables tools to work with these token definitions to generate code for one or more platforms. And secondly, probably even more interesting, is then this enables the token, the schema definitions, to be shareable across platforms, across stacks, which eventually means that our customers, the consumers, benefit from this ability to interop, to integrate. That's how I see it. This is if there's one thing folks on the call should take a look at after this, is the TTF. It is the cornerstone of everything that's happening in the IWA.
Yeah, I'll agree on that. Thank you, John. Always better to hear somebody else
want to
describe
build
it
on
than
that?
myself. Yeah, the TTF started out as just an education tool to teach business people that they already know what tokens are. They just don't know about the speak. And John put it clearly, it's like tokens, once you understand the basics of fungible and non-fungible, then you get into say, well, what's an example of a token that's non-transferable? And you said, well, a diploma for education, your diploma that you got from any institution that you graduated from, you can't just then transfer it to somebody else that didn't do the work. That makes that diploma worthless, essentially. So we need to have simple way of describing behaviors, and it's not just one behavior. You'll have can I if it's transferable or non-transferable, is it divisible or not? Can we create new instances of this, or mint new more supply, if you will, of the token itself, depending on the type of token it is? And probably the most interesting is some of the properties in what we call the property sets. And that's essentially, what are those data elements that the token has hanging off of it? And we define that in an implementation neutral way as a specification. Then you might have 3 or 4 different implementations, all on different blockchains, but you'll have foundational interoperability when the data schemas for the tokens on all of those networks match up, and the field names are the same and the data types are the same, and it makes integration and interoperability just fundamentally easier than it would be if everyone just defined their own way of describing. I mean, if anyone's done any integration and emerging backend databases together, and half the battle is just mapping columns and data fields, across and figuring out how you're going to transfer these things. We address those things at the very beginning, and I agree, it's really the cornerstone of everything we're trying to do here, because it's the very basics of what is that shared medium, or that shared value that we're going to exchange with each other in this business process. And it's the ground floor.
That's great addition. I think maybe we'll take a look at some of the questions we've got. John, I saw you were going to address this one on, do you plan on continuing to add updates to the IWA token designer on Visual Studio Code?
Yes, absolutely. And in fact, I would love to connect with the person who asked the question offline. If you could please ping me on GitHub or LinkedIn or Twitter, wherever is comfortable. I would love to understand, your scenarios. Absolutely, yes. We have a roadmap. There are some bugs we've been fixing, obviously, but we have a roadmap in terms of eventually code gen. As you might recollect, a few months ago, we shipped some sample code gen tools for some of the key platforms. So I would like to see more of our community build extensions and possibly even fork it and do some cool things. I think of the IWA token designer as a reference implementation. So please feel free to take it and build on top of it. And if you have feedback, certainly let me know. And I'm very happy to add this to our backlog.
Yeah, if I could build on that, because that really fascinated me. We talk tokens, and then you talk the technology out of the framework group that Marley mentioned, and we apply that to a specific use case. What is really cool is now you can put that in a visualization, and you could start to get your head around it, because it's really hard to do that sometimes, and when nothing's defined. So that designer tool is another asset that we bring to the table that members can use to take and design the token, which John mentioned. But that continues again to move forward. We don't want to just sit there and have meeting. One thing this is you lean in. If you're going to join an IWA working group, you're going to lean in. Marley and John are the leaders of a lot of the projects, and they put hours into this. We don't expect that. It's usually 1 or 2 a week, but we need that feedback and that engagement so we can move the process forward. And the tools are there to help us do that.
Sounds like a great way to get engaged. Here's another one that sounds like something I think our group could address is, what functionality is missing from current smart contract blockchain platforms that at present would facilitate their broader adoption? Any thoughts on that one?
Yeah, I can start, Robin. I'll just give you this is my opinion, and I want to be very careful. This is my opinion, not necessarily IWA or GBBC.
Okay.
I see a key blocker as this perspective that somehow blockchain developers are different or special or somehow a subset. I look at developers worldwide. There's probably 8, 10, maybe even 12 million developers out there, right? Professional developers. And so I think what is really missing, what has been blocking us, is the inability across the ecosystem to provide first-class professional developer tools that are comparable to what some of the big vendors in the cloud stacks have been doing for a number of years. We need to go after all of these people, millions of developers across the world, and not be comfortable, with the very small number that we have today. That's, to me, I think, a significant issue we have to cross. And this is my opinion. I want to be careful to say.
Anybody else on the panel have an opinion to add on that?
I think, one of the problems, coming from a developer standpoint, is you're only as the smart contracts and the platforms that they're writing are only as good as the requirements and how they're defined and understanding. So there's one of the other things that we tried to solve with this is that fix that major disconnect between what the blockchain platforms can do and what their developers can do with them and what the business people can dream up essentially or express. I think we're trying to address what we think is missing. Is there was this major disconnect, especially when you started talking to people about tokens and the developers would start talking about ERC20s and 751s and 777s and the business people were just like, what? No, I want to create a loyalty program, or I want to have a electronic bill of lading that I can streamline my ports. How do we connect these two worlds together? And I think if we are successful, then it will shine a light, particularly when people are making platform decisions. The other early mistake lots of organizations do is they would pick a platform, they would do these hackathons at their companies, and they would say, hey, we're going to use this as our blockchain of choice, and then without really understanding what they wanted to do with it. So they would then go, throw their developers in this direction, and the developers would say, well, I don't know how to do this in this type of code, or I'm not even sure this blockchain will support that use case. Can we reevaluate this? So I think that was probably the thing that we saw. It's not necessarily a lack of the features, it's the platform's not knowing what features they're lacking. And I think, what we're doing here is very important in both shining a light on making rational decisions about platform decisions, but also highlighting the strengths and weaknesses and where platforms can be improving their programming languages or their features underneath to accept these kinds of use cases.
Yeah, and to build on that, Marley, we've got a lot of questions here about ESG or sustainability, and that's our crown jewel.
I was just about to turn them over to you, Paula.
Yeah, no, we're hungry to talk about. Yeah, this is the part. This is the part we like to talk about. Well, like what's real, what's tangible.
Mm-hmm.
So we talked about all the work that was done. And then we started applying it to a specific use case, sustainability. We had, 50 some members join our first couple of meetings. And then we forked off into a task force to specifically answer some problems about voluntary carbon markets. And I'll give you the flow of where we're at, and then Marty can go back and kind of talk through some of the steps. So you want to get that problem defined. So a task force defines a problem. The inputs are there. And then from there, we start moving it out. We have tangible outputs. There's a GitHub release, there's PR, there's white papers, there's implementation specifications. And then our members can take those, and they're starting to do that now. And a couple yesterday, a couple more are coming. Some big ones are coming up in the next few months that will be showing that you can actually start to implement this stuff in your product design, in your roadmap, and your feedback to your marketplace or partners that will actually start to allow you to be more efficient with your blockchain strategies. Marty, can you tell us a little bit about what you're excited about with the ESG work you're doing?
Yeah, I mean, when we started the sustainability group, we immediately said, well, this sustainability is just too big a space. We need to then have these task force that would focus in very specific areas. And we picked voluntary ecological markets first because it's not under regulatory regimes, so we didn't have those sort of constraints. And there's lots of activity in the voluntary market where large organizations were making net zero claims or commitments, but had no idea how they're actually going to achieve that. And so then we said, okay, well, let's. When you get into that, you have two sides of a ledger, and I'll back this up a little bit. When you look at sort of carbon accounting using just carbon, ESG is more than just carbon, but let's stick to that one thing. You could say, well, there's it's a double entry accounting sort of thing that we can do. You can have debits on one side, and those are essentially tokenizing your emissions, if you will, or at least understanding where your emissions are and then making disclosure of those emissions. And then on the credit side of the house is, what are the things that I can use to lower my effective emissions for the emissions that I can't immediately reduce? And how do we make sure that accounting lines up? And then it led into deeper issues to saying, okay, well, we have fundamental issues that we need to address on one half of this side of the ledger, because even that one, scope is too big to bite off and make progress on. So we started to say, let's narrow our scope down to where we can take something end to end, or what we call full slice from top to bottom, and define the tokens, the contracts, and the insight using these frameworks for, in this case, voluntary ecological markets that are creating credits, ecological credits, in this case, carbon credits. We focus a lot on carbon removal credits because those are sort of the next generation of credits that we're defining. And define what the business process workflow is, define what the tokens are. We tokenize, in the group, we tokenize the claims, the processing of the claims, and the resulting credit that's there. We have smart contracts that help lay the groundwork for how a claim, how it goes from cradle to grave, right? To where that credit is ultimately retired. And we were able to do that in about 6 months of doing that, and just defining the overall ecological markets overview. And now what we're doing is we're then focusing on each individual step and refining the specifications. And we're doing that for the retirement of carbon credits or any side of ecological credit at the moment. But we've done it also for the creation of supply. So how does a credit actually become a credit? And then what's all that data? How do we link all of that evidence for that credit together? And we're really excited about that. The specs have gone out. We've had some implementations, early implementations on multiple different types of platforms that are seeing this rapidly leading to POCs and pilots. And we're really excited about the progress that we've made in that one scope, but that's just the beginning. It's just the small part. That working group has so much potential to cover so many more topics. And we're excited to see new groups join in and starting to help to address the other side of the ledger on the emission side, which is, I think, a harder problem, especially when we talk about carbon supply chains and, making sure those two platforms and the accounting systems line up so we can have, a holistic view of carbon accounting at the organization level and at the country level at some point.
So
Yes.
I think that really leads us to, did you have something to add on there,
Oh,
John?
yeah. I was just going to give a little headline here. So if you want more information on what Marley's talking about, there's 2 ways you can get it. Go to interwork.org. And there's a white paper under, I think, resources. We'll post it. It's actually going to be in a deck we're following up to send the group. So that's one. It's a white paper on where we're at. We have another one coming out in November. The second part is we wrote extensively about this in the GSMI, which is the Global Standards Mapping Initiative. We had many members. Thank you very much if you're on the call, and got yourself engaged in that, because it was a lot of work. But in 3 areas, you'll see a lot of what we're doing built out. One is what we're calling the Green Economy Group. One is in the Taxonomy Group, and one is in the I can't remember the other one offhand now. But it's very deeply woven in. You'll be able to start seeing that this stuff is actually coming to life. So again, if you need to have questions, please let us know on that.
That's a perfect tee up. So that for the next question, which is, what's coming on next, what's on the horizon for IWA. So you certainly have, given some ideas of what's coming up on the sustainability front, but are there any other highlights, you or any of the other panelists would like to really bring, up for the crowd here to understand what they can expect coming up next?
One of the things when Sandra and I worked on the merger with the boards is that our board came over intact and is now the IWA leadership team. And as I said, they're very hands-on. So Mike Myron's at Microsoft, John's in development, and Yuval at Digital Asset. Like that whole team is really engaged, SDX, on what's happening in the marketplace. So we're defining at that level a couple of things. One is what we're calling the debt issuance working group, and the idea there is what's that ecosystem, and what could a token do in that environment. And we've already kicked off a couple of meetings. Again, let us know. I'll give you some information at the end on how you can connect with us. The second one is there's always been interest in global supply chain. And I think now that we went through the pandemic, you're going to see a lot more interest in how do we fix this thing. And there are a lot of solutions potentially with blockchain type technology. And then we're also looking at a lot of thought leadership around things like DeFi and DLT. The beauty of what GBBC brings to the table is we have, we go from basically 60 members to 330 members, and that's just those are companies and organizations. So if each company adds 2 or 3 people, you're looking at a network of like 1,300, 1,500 people to really start to help us scale and get feedback, and then support the membership in terms of what they want to get done. So then part of the roadmap is dependent on you. Like, look at this stuff, come up with some ideas, let's talk and figure out if there's a working group we could potentially spin up together. But that's kind of the headline of where we're going.
Sounds good. Anything, Marley or John, to add from your viewpoint and your roles with the IWA?
Maybe I could there was a question about tools and testing. I just want to make a quick comment there, Robin, and I responded on the chat window.
Yeah.
There is very clearly an angle, and this is something we are working on, to extend the tooling to address testing frameworks, and also certification. Maybe Paul, perhaps you want to talk about that a little bit as well. I know this is a very big item that we have in terms of our roadmap, which is going to be hugely beneficial for the developers, the builders, and our customers on both sides.
Yeah, certification has always been on the roadmap. We needed to get some implementation and some structure in place so we know what needs to be certified, and we're starting to get definition around that. The board has given direction that we want to look deeper into it. So if you have any expertise on certification, raise your hand and let us know. But we'll be looking at that into 2022 as well.
Okay. Yeah, I think before we close out, Paul, I'd ask you, just if maybe you could summarize what the benefits are of IWA participation, and what do you have to do to join? What is the process to get involved?
Paul, you're muted.
Paul is muted. Hold on. Now
You're right. I was
go.
muted. We'll get the blockchain technology figured out when we use our mics right. So one of the questions we get is, how do I get involved, and what do I do, and what benefit do I get in my company? What does my company get from it? Well, number one, we'll be on the cutting edge of driving, the collaboration to drive open source standards. And again, we probably didn't highlight it enough, but this is all open source software. There's some details on that in the next slide. But that idea of collaborating, coming together with people trying to solve some of the same problems, and it's not proprietary. You leave your proprietary, at your office or on your desktop or laptop, but collaborate on some of the issues as Marley laid out. 2, then to start building the frameworks. Like I said, this is, we're in like V1 of a lot of this stuff, and we've got a long way to go. John mentioned certification, and then, at the end of the day, it gets exciting when you start seeing implementation or potential to actually bring this stuff to market and make it real in your world. So those are 4 of the big reasons I think you should be motivated or could be motivated to join, let alone the depth of access that GBBC now brings to the table with us to expand your horizon even further. And one idea too is we don't want just one person in an organization. If you have a team of 2 or 3 people, it's best that way, because you can mix and match and dig into the different assets that we have available to our members.
Great.
So we've got a lot of questions here. How do we join? And that's a great question to have. So if you're a GBBC member, then send me an email, paul.rapino@gbbcouncil.org, and we will get you the follow-up information on that. There is an open source software policy that you'll have to look at, but again, it's a pretty standard open source. And once that's all moving through the channel and we get that done, we can get you in, we can get you focused on a product, on a use case, and get you onboarded. And there's some really nice tools we have internally to bring you up to speed, pretty quickly with that. So again, if you have questions or want to join and you're a GBBC member, come through this route and we'll walk you through it. If you're not a GBBC member and you're an IWA member, you're still together as one and you can continue to move forward, or just join one of the groups. If you have questions, let me know. And if you're listening or you have contacts that are outside of your company, so it's a corporate membership, but if it's outside of your company, you have a partner, customer, or whatever the relationship is, get them in touch with us. They'd have to join GBBC. We would give them a quick or a deep overview of the benefits and ways they could plug in, and then we can get them into one of our working groups. So basically 3 ways: GBBC member, reach out; IWA member, reach out. If you're a not a member, reach out. We'll get you the information on how you can join GBBC and IWA.
Okay. Well, I think that brings us to a conclusion then. I just want to thank the IWA and all the panelists who participated today. We certainly had a lot of interaction with the audience, asking a lot of really interesting questions, people super engaged. And I think the panelists provided great overview on the important work that the IWA has been doing so far, both from the frameworks as well as the working groups. We did get to spend some time, digging into the TTF as well. So that was really helpful. And then, how to get engaged with the IWA. So if you have any questions, please reach out to us. We'll be happy to follow up with you, after the session today. So thank you to everyone who participated in the session. And again, to the panelists for taking their time to be here today.
Thank you, Robin. Thanks for listening.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks, John. Thanks, Marley.